Julia watched from the front door of the townhouse as her husband Peter got into his Jaguar XJ. She waved and sent him a kiss. Peter smiled and waved back, then pulled out of the driveway and headed to the airport for his flight to New York. Julia leaned contentedly against the door jamb and enjoyed the South Florida morning. It was still cool, but soon it would be hot. Her small yard was strewn with lantana and pentas, and two magnificent bougainvilleas framed the front door and small porch. A floral scent wafted through the air, and butterflies fluttered from flower to flower. Julia was a 30-year-old beauty with purple hair, outgoing and independent. She worked as a copy editor at a publishing house, working mostly with authors of romance novels and other women's fiction. Peter and Julia had been married for 7 years. Peter was 19 years older than Julia. When they married, their family and friends were taken aback by the age difference. But as Julia explained to her younger sister and select friends, the advantage of older men was that they were patient, skillful lovers who knew how to pleasure a woman, unlike those young bulls her age she slept with. After all, everyone knows to drink old wine, not new, because old wine is much more flavorful and rich. Julia wasn't a fortune hunter, but still, a girl should be aware of all the positives her potential suitors can bring to the altar. Julia came to South Florida from the poor coal province of Kentucky in search of an education and opportunities that were not available in her homeland. She found both. Peter saw a beautiful young woman serving tables at a nightclub while she was pursuing a degree in English at a local university. During the late winter and spring, the couple lived in their townhouse in Florida. In the heat of summer and from fall through New Year's Day, they lived in their main and much larger home near Highlands in the mountains of North Carolina. It was a true mansion, with several year-round servants and all the trappings of truly wealthy people. Peter's business often required 1 or 2 trips a month, usually lasting 3 to 5 days, and sometimes more. Julia, who had a job, several hobbies, and an avid fitness enthusiast, was not a burden. Besides, the townhouse was only 2 blocks from the beach, and a half-mile away was a waterfront filled with high-end stores, restaurants, bars, and nightclubs with various live entertainment. When Peter was in town, they visited often, and when he was away, she didn't hesitate to visit as a bachelor. After all, she was a grown woman these days. Julia watched her husband disappear on the way to the airport. He was a good man and a wonderful husband. She, in turn, was a devoted and faithful wife. She was indeed very devoted to Peter, and they were a wonderful couple. But she was also a vibrant, young, and very attractive woman with an older husband from a different generation. This combination sometimes led to unfortunate complications. 3 or 4 years ago, in Peter's absence, Julia had begun to succumb to the siren song of carnal temptation. Perhaps she'd gone astray a couple times over the years. No, that wasn't quite right either. Perhaps it wasn't just that. Let's just say she was a good woman of easy behavior with a healthy carnal appetite, and we'll leave it at that. In the past, a husband owned his wife and her valuable, tangible assets as full property. In today's world, a husband's rights to his wife's tangible assets are more like a lease than a contract. Consequently, if the tenant, in this case the husband, cannot occupy the premises, it makes sense for the landlord, in this case the wife, to sublet her assets to be occupied by another man in the absence of the original tenant. In this case, Julia's extramarital actions can be viewed as those of a prudent businesswoman maximizing the return and use of her valuable assets, which are in significant demand on the open market. In the end, Julia was simply a spoiled young woman who occasionally fooled around for fun and excitement, but without serious intentions. Peter was a cosmopolitan, highly educated man with a brilliant business mind. He was a hard realist and had no illusions. He knew that men would be proposing to his attractive young wife as soon as his back was turned. And his young wife would be heavily seduced by young studs her own age. How could she not be? It's an old story, often retold in literature and played out in reality. Peter realized that he had a Ferrari as a wife. Such a treasure should not be locked away in a garage. A Ferrari should be let out on the open roads occasionally. If one wants to enjoy driving such a magnificent work of physical art, one must accept the fact that there may be speeding tickets along the way. Peter was tolerant of his young wife's possible quirks. They did not have an open arrangement, but he was deliberate in his actions, and she was circumspect. Peter kept his wife informed of his schedule and was careful not to come home unexpectedly. Most importantly, he minded his own business. Julia, for the most part, limited her adventures to periods when he was traveling. They were also usually limited to periods when they were in South Florida. In North Carolina, they had servants and too many friends and relatives to lead too promiscuous a life without causing a public scandal. But here in South Florida, they were far from their usual social circle, and the area was flooded with vacationers and snowbirds fleeing the winter weather. In this nameless mass, there was plenty of choice for an attractive girl like Julia. Julia looked down the street toward the beach. There was William, walking at a brisk pace just in time. He was a slender, dark-haired, casual man about her age. She waved enthusiastically and smiled happily. William waved back. William had asked Julia to dance at a nightclub last year, and one thing had quickly led to another. He was a Parisian and clearly wealthy, as he took a month-long vacation every spring to vacation in South Florida. He had a large beach house a few blocks from Julia's house, and they met there regularly when Peter was out of town and William was in town. But today William had come to see her, eager to renew their heated acquaintance from last year. A shiver of excitement ran down Julia's spine. Well, you know what they say about French lovers, and she could vouch that their reputation was well-deserved. Love with her husband was beautiful. Love with William was the spicy, forbidden lust of the unknown and dangerous. She loved both kinds of love. It was just that they were different realms of intimate experience that did not overlap. As William stepped onto the stairs, Julia reached out and pulled him inside, closing the door behind them. She wrapped her arms around him and plunged into a deep kiss. William responded with passion. Julia broke the kiss, turned, and panting with anticipation, dragged William up the stairs to the master bedroom. The pair quickly reached the bed, an antique iron bed so high that Julia had to take a small leap to sit on the edge. William began kissing Julia with pleasure. Then came the clatter of footsteps on the stairs, and the fateful call, "Darling?" Distracted by William's caresses, Julia did not hear her husband's car pull up, the automatic door lock jingle, or the front door open. The worst moment of the adulterous rendezvous had arrived. The unsuspecting husband suddenly appeared on the scene. From Julia's vantage point, looking up at him from below, William was like a frightened groundhog popping out of its burrow to look at unexpected danger. The impending disaster, her husband's imminent appearance at the Amoureux spectacle, precluded any delay, or Julia would have convulsively laughed at William looking around in horror. William whispered, "Your husband!" At the same time, Julia whispered, "My husband!" Peter's rich voice carried up the stairs. "Honey, the airline sent me a message that my flight has been canceled. I am now on a later flight." The adulterous couple jumped out of bed. They heard Peter's slow footsteps coming up the stairs. It was the clatter of doom approaching step by step. William grabbed Julia's hand and whispered hysterically, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" William was in a panic, Julia thought. A horny husband who discovers a stranger in his wife's bed often reacts quite violently. With the rage usually directed at the stranger, Peter's muscular and athletic physique was part of his attraction to Julia. At one time, Peter had even been a moderately successful heavyweight in the Harvard Boxing Club. William, on the other hand, was a more intellectual type, favoring poetry and art over sports. Despite the age difference, they were not really suited for each other. There was little choice, accept the discovery and throw herself on Peter's mercy, or hide William. Julia took charge of the situation like a general on the battlefield, stopping a catastrophic rout. Peter was too far away from the stairs for William to reach her study in the second bedroom unnoticed. Both the closet and the bathroom could have served as an initial hiding place, but neither of them had any place to hide if Peter happened to look in there. The antique bed was at least 30 inches away, and the quilt hung almost to the floor. Julia nudged William toward the bed and hissed emphatically, "Under the bed! Crawl to the other side and lie still no matter what happens." William didn't hesitate and threw himself to the floor. There was a soft thud as William's head hit the lower iron rail. William grunted, stopped, and grabbed his forehead. Julia put her foot on William's bare back, pushing him forward and whispering desperately, "For God's sake, hurry up!" William redoubled his efforts and began to squeeze his way under the bed. My God, this is turning into a vaudeville farce or one of those convoluted Shakespearean comedies, she thought. Julia tore the blanket where it had been left a moment ago, jumped out of bed, and gathered up her discarded clothes and shoes that were lying on the bedroom floor. Julia rushed into the bathroom and stuffed everything into the dirty laundry hamper. She shouted, "I'm in the bathroom, dear. I was taking a bath." She was a girl and regularly enjoyed a sensual bath over reading a trashy novel. At least that was a plausible explanation for her nakedness. Julia hurried back and looked around the bedroom for clues that might alert her husband and indicate the presence of an uninvited guest in married life. There, one of William's shoes turned up in a collection of discarded clothes. Julia had been a great soccer player in high school and had launched the shoe under the bed. In desperation, she may have kicked it too hard, and a startled grunt sounded from under the bed. Approaching the bedroom door more calmly than she thought possible, Julia feigned equanimity and asked, "What did you say happened to your flight? Did something happen, dear?" Peter appeared in the bedroom doorway. His tall, muscular figure, clad in a strict Brioni suit, radiated competence and masculinity. "Oh, yes, this is the man I married, and for good reason," Julia reminded herself. "Oh, no, it's okay. Halfway to the airport, I got a message from the airline that my flight was canceled, and I was being transferred to another flight. I sent you—" Peter froze in place in surprise. His beautiful naked wife was looking at him, her brilliant hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. Perhaps there was more fear or excitement than mirth in that sparkle, or perhaps a combination of all three. "I wasn't expecting such a nice welcome home. As I said, I wrote you to tell you I was coming home and suggested you have a cup of coffee with one of those wonderful blueberry muffins you baked this morning." Among her many talents, Julia was a skilled cook and enjoyed preparing meals and culinary delights for Peter. Julia assumed a defiant pose, jutting out one thigh and placing her hand on her hip defiantly. "Ah, I left my phone downstairs and didn't notice the message. I was going to enjoy a nice swim before getting to today's editorial," she continued, teasing him. "I think I can be persuaded to postpone it for coffee and muffins with my husband." Julia turned and walked back into the bathroom, turned off the tub faucet, and asked over her shoulder, "And what time do you have, dear?" As Julia reached for the robe hanging on the bathroom door, two muscular arms encircled her and lifted her effortlessly off the floor. Peter carried his struggling and laughing wife to the bed. After all, she had no desire to actually escape what was about to happen. A panicked William lay face down under the bed, his forehead throbbing from his head hitting the bed rail and his face burning from Julia kicking a shoe at him. He'd seen Peter several times last year at night with Julia. He hadn't had the slightest desire to come face to face with the big guy. Such a confrontation wouldn't end well for him, William suspected. William could hear everything that was said between husband and wife and watch what was happening. Well, he could watch what was happening from the ankles down. He heard Julia land on the bed above him as her husband's clothes cascaded to the floor and were tossed aside. William had Julia's motor running full blast before her husband even arrived. The bed began to rock rhythmically. William began to fear that the 200-year-old cast-iron bed frame would break from brittle fatigue and he would be trapped under the springs and mattress. The gasping couple crouched on the edge of the bed to catch their breath. And then Julia exclaimed, "It's a good thing the plane was canceled." William, relieved that the bed frame had withstood the dynamic load, watched them walk toward the bathroom. Julia nudged Peter toward the shower stall and ordered, "Take a quick shower and get dressed. You'll have to go out in public again. I'll make some fresh coffee and heat up some muffins." Julia grabbed her robe from the back of the bathroom door, threw it on, kissed her husband as he stepped into the shower, and returned to the bedroom. Julia tiptoed to the edge of the bed and knelt down to look underneath, covering her mouth with her hand to suppress a giggle. There William lay. The ridiculous irony of the situation tickled Julia's bones. William's forehead had developed a nasty yellow and blue stain from the bed frame, and his right eye was beginning to blacken from being hit by a shoe. "Ah, poor thing," cried Julia quietly, putting her finger to her lips and whispering, "Shh, don't move. The floors are creaking. He will hear you downstairs. I'll come for you when it's clear." William nodded that he understood. Julia got up, picked up Peter's clothes off the floor, and carried them into the bathroom. Then she went downstairs. A few minutes later, Peter got out of the shower, got dressed, and went downstairs as well. Lying in his close hiding place, William could hear Julia's pleasant voice and Peter's more intense tones interspersed with light laughter as the couple enjoyed coffee and muffins together downstairs. This pleasant couple sat directly below where the woman's distraught and battered lover was hiding. Finally, Julia looked at her watch and exclaimed, "Honey, it's been wonderful, but if you want to catch your plane, you've got to go." Peter grimaced. "You're right. Everything has been wonderful, but I have to go." The couple kissed warmly at the door, and Julia watched her delightful husband leave for the second time that morning. As Julia turned to walk up the stairs, her phone, which was on the nightstand by the door, buzzed with an incoming message. Julia opened the messaging app. There were 2 messages from Peter. The old one about the flight being canceled and him coming home, and a new one that had just arrived. The new one said, "Thanks for a great morning. Don't have too much fun without me today." And it ended with a winking emoji. Subscribe to our channel to keep your partner from cheating on you, and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next.